With me now to talk about our national security in the context of world events is retired Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who served as the counterterrorism coordinator on President Ronald Reagan's National Security Council staff. He is now CEO of Fidelis Publishing and Fidelis Media and author of a new book, Tragic Consequences. Colonel, welcome back to Washington Watch.
It's great to be with you, my friend. And by the way, the subtitle on that book is The Price America is Paying for Rejecting God and How to Reclaim Our Culture for Christ. So you can be sure this book is going to get banned by the far left in America today, because all the things you were just saying are true. Let me make an observation, if I may, Tony, about this particular anniversary. 78 years ago today, 150,000 U.S., Canadian, and British troops landed at Normandy. Before they ever departed, then the Supreme Allied Commander, almost MacArthur, Dwight David Eisenhower, had prepared an explanation for what had happened and took full, in other words, this is the great, please forgive me. The letter, it's handwritten, it's in the Eisenhower Library. And I actually show it on the version we did for War Stories on the 60th anniversary, which, by the way, shameless self-promotion, is still available. It's the War Stories is the longest-running, continuously broadcast military documentary series in history. And if you go to Season 2, Episode 7 on Tubi TV, type in War Stories with Oliver North, you can see this anniversary edition of D-Day, the 60th anniversary, and I show the handwritten notes that Eisenhower was going to use if the landing had failed. And that's something that does not happen in modern times. If you consider what happened in the aftermath of Afghanistan, which truly was a disaster, no one took accountability. No one assumed responsibility. No one became the person to look to who's accountable to the American people for what happened. And, of course, to all the troops that we left behind, the American citizens that were left behind, and all of our allies. It was a horrendous disaster, yet no one has yet taken any responsibility for that disaster. How unlike President, or then Commander-in-Chief Eisenhower was for the D-Day landing 78 years ago today.
Well, I think that your book is very timely as we talk about the title, Tragic Consequences, The Price America is Paying for Rejecting God and How to Reclaim Our Culture for Christ. When you look at the world stage and the threats that are out there today, and I go back to what I played the clip of FDR leading the nation in prayer. What is there that would bring us together to face these mounting challenges, whether they be domestic or they be foreign, without faith?
Well, the reason for the timing for this book was because it was this came out in May last month, and it was all about nominating and then electing the right kind of people to represent us in government. I'm not just talking about in Congress or the White House. I'm talking about at every level: school boards, county boards of supervisors, city councils, mayors. This country has got to find people who are going to help us reclaim our culture for Christ. Because what we now have done, 1962, we drove prayer out of public schools. Tony, I still remember the prayer. I was in the last high school class in America, 1961, that could say these words in a public school. And by the way, the person who drafted the language, the original language, it was a little bit longer, was Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the one who inserted "under God" into our Pledge of Allegiance. Right. And the prayer was, Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee and beg your blessings on us, our parents, our teachers, our country. That was the prayer that was deemed to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. 11 years later, the Supreme Court again steps in and says infanticide is legal. Okay? In other words, the Roe v. Wade decision. Since then, the sanctity of human life has disappeared in our country. That's one of the reasons for the crime wave that we're experiencing. We need to reclaim our culture for Christ. This book is a straightforward presentation of the various issues that are affecting our future. I've got 18 grandchildren. Right. I want them to have a future like you and I had. And that's not going to happen unless we put the right people in office.
I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'm going to go ahead and tee it up now. What you just described, the left would say, well, that's Christian nationalism. You're wanting to impose your values on the rest of America.
No, I want the rest of America to accept the values that are in the Holy Bible, okay? Because the framers of our Constitution, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and the Congress that approved it, okay, and declared our independence, they are the only seminal documents of any country on the planet that pay homage to God Almighty. And people just sit down and look at what they were talking about, and they still apply today.
Right.
The end result of that is the destruction of all the good things that this country's been able to do. God blessed this country in ways no other country's been blessed. We're the most generous, prosperous country on earth. What we need to do is restore those values to make sure that my grandkids have a future.
You know, part of the challenge we have is, as you laid out, that was the values that the founders had, but we don't teach history. We've rewritten history in this country. In fact, we're teaching kids to hate this country and what it stands for. Colonel, we're up against a break. When we come back, I want to look at the international scene right now. Over the weekend, we had North Korea firing a barrage of 8 missiles. What does the future look like in terms of our national security? Where are the greatest threats? And what do we need to do to be prepared? So I want to talk about that when we come back. My guest, Colonel Oliver North, author of a new book, Tragic Consequences, The Price America is Paying for Rejecting God and How to Reclaim Our Culture for Christ. We're going to continue our conversation, taking a look at the threats that we face. Continuing our conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, retired from the United States Marine Corps, who served as the counterterrorism coordinator on President Ronald Reagan's National Security Council staff. In fact, I was in the Marine Corps then myself as a sergeant when he was a lieutenant colonel. He's now the CEO of Fidelis Publishing and Fidelis Media and the author of a new book, Tragic Consequences, The Price America is Paying for Rejecting God and How to Reclaim the Culture for Christ. Colonel, good to have you with us. Over the weekend, North Korea fired 8 short-range ballistic missiles into the waters off its east coast. That was the 17th launch by North Korea just this year. It came from 4 different sites. How do you explain this increasing aggressiveness of North Korea? What's driving it?
Well, first of all, what's driving it is money, and the money's coming from communist China, Russia, and Iran. The Iranians are helping them build nuclear weapons, and the Chinese are all over this thing. The fact is, we've got a planet that is in very near danger, existential danger, in case if the United States was attacked with an electromagnetic pulse weapon fired from one of these hypersonic weapons that they've both developed, both Russia and China. We're way behind on that. And all those kinds of things that are threatening our country, the invasion across our southern border, the enormous crime wave that's broken out here in this country, the kinds of threats that the inflation is going to cause, not just for us, but for our great-grandchildren, the way things are going, the debt that's being piled up. All of those are indicators of a serious problem in this country. And I think that the national security issues are as great as they've ever been. If you look at
let me ask you, so do you think, Colonel, that in part it might be that they perceive weakness and lack of solid foundation? I'm talking about North Korea in this case, because we're seeing, it seems like since the Biden administration came into place, the world's spinning out of control.
Well, it is, in large part because of what this administration has done. And that's why I say one of the most important elections we'll ever have is about to happen here in November, and then the next one in 2024. We have got to find the right kind of people who will, as I say, return our culture to that which our forefathers included in the Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution. And I know people are upset about the way things are going, but the only way to fix it is to put the right people in office. And the Chinese are basically goosing us every time we turn around. They are our number one adversary.
Mike Pompeo, when he was Secretary of State, made very clear that he was a Christian, and that that helped him actually in foreign policy, which I agree. He's a close friend. See, I think what you're advocating, I agree with 100%. We need more Christians who believe the Bible, understand right from wrong, have a moral foundation, and I think that gives you a greater level of determination to hold your ground, and I think it makes your enemies fear you when you actually stand for something and you believe something and you'll fight for that.
Well, of course. One of the great problems that we've got, whether it's the horror of what's been happening in our schools, or whether it's the North Koreans feeling that there's no consequences for them if they fire off ballistic missiles. They could easily pound the living daylights out of Seoul. Seoul's just south, as you know, of the DMZ that separates the two countries. Why are they doing it? Because they're testing our resolve as to what we really mean. And the Chinese are encouraging that. They're looking at Taiwan with avarice. They're looking at the ideas of taking charge of basically the South China Sea and territorial gains that are contrary to everything that we know, everything that the international community supports. And at the same time, this administration is bumbling through everything. It's not just Afghanistan. And then that's the horror show that people are going to remember for decades. The ideas of what the provocateurs in places like Iran intend to do, God help us if they end up with nuclear weapons. Israel will be the first target and we'll be the second.
But what you are laying out, again, which I agree 100% with you, is that we cannot escape the consequences of what we see playing out on the international stage. It all comes back to what we believe here at home and what we have embraced. We've rejected truth, we've rejected God, and this is what we get.
No, and the consequences are horrific. They really are. I was asked the other day by a reporter who was actually the first trip I've made out of town since my wife became ill. I went down to a heroes, basically festival in Daytona Beach. And it was put on by a group of Christians who wanted a large number of people to do the kinds of things on Memorial Day that would remember those who made such great sacrifices. And on the way, a reporter asked me, "So you're a big Bible thumper?" And I said, "Well, you could call me that, but I am a Bible reader." And he says, "Well, what's your favorite verse?" Testing me. I said, "Well, today my favorite verse is one that I've had people, I've prayed for others at the moments just before they died. When I held dying Marines in my arms, when my own dad died. It's Romans 10:9. If you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." That's not just true for me and you, Tony, or my dad, or those dying Marines. That's true for our nation. If our nation would simply pray that and believe it, we'd be okay. We're going to come out of this. The ideas of the framers of our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence was we had to be a, quote, religious people. I don't think religious is not necessarily the right word. I think we need to be faithful. And so I look at it through the eyes of a Marine. The words Semper Fidelis, always faithful, is not just a slogan. It's a way of life. It needs to be for all of us to preserve this country.
Well, Semper Fi, Marine. Good to have you on, Colonel.
Semper
Always
Fi.
great to see you and talk with you.
You give my fine regards to General Boykin, if you would, sir.